Hi, I am Tara Frame from Frame and Frame. I'm an estate planning, elder law, and probate attorney, and I'm here this morning with Suzanne Ratty, who is a colleague of mine. She's also a member of our Thrive networking group, and we've had some discussions recently about long-term care planning, specifically her prior experience and some other of our colleagues' experiences, and there were a lot of questions. So we thought we would do this program this morning to answer some of those questions and talk about this very important topic.
Yeah, I think the thing that came up in our conversations recently that just struck me was that estate planning is not long-term care planning. I didn't know what long-term care planning was, but both my husband and I and our parents, they've been through some sort of estate planning process. And they pretty much told us, hey, we've got it figured out, everything's taken care of. And so when we had our discussions recently, I was really surprised to learn the difference between the two things. And honestly, that maybe they weren't quite protected or that their assets weren't quite protected.
Right. So, I do have a lot of people say, oh, I have a will or I have a trust, everything's good, everything's in place. Um, and that's great because those are definitely very important pieces that everyone should have those basics in place. But an estate plan is generally looking at what's going to happen after you die. A typical estate plan is not planning for your incapacity or your incompetence. So, well, your incompetence, yes, but not your incapacity or disability. So, if you pass away, then that estate plan is fine and it will pass on your assets to your heirs, your children, your grandchildren, your charities. But more than likely, you will go through a period of disability for a period of time before you pass. So that's what people don't think about, or they think about, that's not going to happen to me. I'm just going to go peacefully in my sleep and then, my estate plan will kick in. But in reality, that's not what happens. 7 out of 10 people enter skilled nursing care or long-term care at some point in their lifetime. So, an estate planning attorney doesn't necessarily look at those issues, whereas an elder law attorney is specifically looking at those issues. So there are different parts of a plan that go along with your estate plan, a part of your estate plan that deal specifically with those periods of disability. And how is the family going to pay for the long-term care costs or skilled nursing home costs in this day and age when those costs can be in this area anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000 a month.
And
So
Tara, yeah,
the
I think
family's
it,
assets can just dwindle, like that.
and I think that's so important. I think two things there. The first is, and again, I didn't realize this, estate planning and an estate planning attorney do not typically, not always, but not typically look at the costs of long-term care. So in our family situation, there is long-term care costs. There's a diagnosis of dementia. So those are significant, not just time and resources and money, but even as a family, we've had to think about how are we going to care for this family member. So it was really striking to me that because I've been through an estate planning process does not mean that anybody has considered or looked at the costs of long-term care.
Right. And yeah, like I said, an estate plan specifically deals with what happens after you die. A long-term care plan is looking at what's happening while you're still alive. So we're looking at not only how to pass the assets on eventually to your children, but how are we going to deal with those long-term care costs and avoid the person, the disabled person going destitute. There are programs that will help pay for or defray the costs of long-term care, but in Maryland, you basically have to be sick and broke before you qualify. So there are ways and there's strategies that are, have been used for a long time to try to protect some of those assets for the family. And it's not even necessarily to pass on the assets to the children. That's part of it. But let me give you an example. So if you have a parent that needs skilled nursing home, what most people think is, oh, I have to spend all of their money down. I have to spend it all before they can qualify for the Medicaid long-term care insurance or long-term insurance program. Um, so they wait and they wait and they wait. But um, if they think plan ahead, there are things that we can do to protect that money and put some aside. So if you have a parent going into a skilled nursing facility and there's no money to care for them, then who's going to pay for those expenses? So we can put money aside to pay for the parents' incidental expenses for their haircuts, their clothing, their co-pays, a vacation, taking them out to lunch, things like this that people don't really think about, their cable bill, their cell phone bill, if they want to have a phone in the facility. So all of these things generally will fall to the children if you don't set aside some of the money. And, under the programs, you can't have all that money in your name. So we have to use these strategies to protect that money for the person and then to pass on to the children after that person passes.
Well, and I think that's such a key element. So with my own family situation, we found all this out after my dad was in a critical state. But I didn't realize, none of my family realized, that there's a 5-year Medicaid look back requirement. So it's not like you can just go, oh, well, you know what? He has this money. Let's put that aside for this. And, this will all just be a shell game, basically. But Medicaid has a 5-year look back requirement. And so whatever we had done, even though it was well intentioned and we had no forethought, whatever we had done 3 years ago actually counted towards his qualifying for Medicaid. That was a really big bump in the road for us.
Right. So yeah, so if you have an estate plan, like I said, people have a revocable trust. And that is a typical trust plan. You have the revocable trust, but revocable means you have full access to it. So, you can get to those monies and they're all counted against you as countable resources when you're potentially filing for Medicaid to pay for the long-term skilled nursing home care costs. So, um, if you plan ahead, like I said, we can use these strategies. So, but it has to be more than 5 years. So let me give you an example. So I had a client, he was an older gentleman, and he actually had stock in McCormick. And he had this stock for many, many years, like 30 years he's had the stock, and it's grown to about $300,000. So he wanted to know how can he protect that and pass it on to his family. So what we ended up doing was just taking that stock that he doesn't use, he doesn't need that to pay his monthly bills, and we put that aside in an asset protected trust and then kept all of his other assets out so that he has access to them, he can use them. But we know 100% that those stocks are going to pass on to the family when he passes. That won't be part of his estate. It won't be subject to recovery by Medicaid. It won't be subject to recovery by creditors. So that's a perfect scenario.
And I
Another
think,
scenario, yeah, I mean, just I have people like that come in ahead of time, and it's just we can really do a lot of things to protect the family money in those situations. If they do come in within the 5-year look back period, so let's say we've done an estate plan, but now they know that they're going to have to go into a nursing home in the next few months. There's a lot that we still can do. So the family does not have to spend down all of the money before they're eligible. There are crisis strategies that we can utilize to protect a good portion of the assets for the elderly person to use during the time that they're needing the care, and then eventually to pass on to the family as a legacy. So it's not, if you don't do it 5 years prior, it's not the worst thing in the world, but you don't really want to wait until a crisis. You want to do the planning when you have time to think about it, you're informed, you're not in crisis mode, things are calm, and you have time to really make the decisions, and we can put everything in place. As opposed to if you're waiting until the family member is going into the nursing home, then we have 30 days for the most part, and we're scrambling to get all of the information, getting everything in place, putting the long-term care plan in place, and then filing potentially for the Medicaid benefits for that person. So, we strongly encourage people to pre-plan, and have the discussion with your parents ahead of time, because, like I said, it's heartbreaking when a family comes in and they're in crisis mode, and they're just not able to think clearly, and we try to help them and we can help them, but it's just not the best scenario, the best situation to make those decisions. You want to do it early.
Yeah, and I think, there's a couple of key points for me that certainly ring true with our own situation. And the first is that's why your guidance is so important, because the average Joe, people like me, my family, my brothers and sisters, we didn't know any of this. And we were forced into an educational process in a moment of crisis. That was not the ideal scenario. It would have been great if any of us, my parents, us, any of us had known about this a few years back. We could have planned a whole lot better. And then, number two, down at the bottom of the screen, we've got your guide. That guide is so comprehensive. And for us, it was actually a great way to start the conversations with another member of the family to help them understand that just because they have an estate plan does not mean everything's been handled. Our parents are famous for saying, we've got it handled, we met with an attorney, we're good. And so I will say I really like that guide, just as a way to even start the conversations or to help your family understand some of the circumstances you've talked about today. I think it's really, really helpful.
Yeah, and the other thing I do want to point out is, another piece that I did not mention. Another piece of a long-term care plan is powers of attorney. So again, if you just print off a power of attorney off the internet, or if you just get a basic statutory power of attorney, and even a lot of the powers of attorney that just general estate plans include, are not robust enough to deal with the long-term care planning and elder law issues that we deal with. We have to have enhanced powers that allow the children to do the planning that they need. So that's a really, really important piece. And that's basically kind of where we start off, is asking about the power of attorney. What do they have one, and what's in that power of attorney? So that's important. But yeah, it's a really hard conversation to have with parents, especially parents that, keep everything close to their vest, and they don't want to share their finances. But then what happens is the children are the ones kind of picking up all the pieces when this happens, and they don't have any information. They don't know what their parents have. And then they're scrambling to put things in place to pay, to figure out how are we going to pay $10,000 or $12,000 a month for a skilled nursing facility. So yeah, if you download our free guide to long-term care and Medicaid planning, and pass it on to your family members, or give it to your parents, let them read it so that they realize that these are some really important issues that it's best for the family to deal with, as a whole, as opposed to waiting until, crisis mode.
Great information. Thanks for having me today. And as you mentioned, anybody watching this video, download that guide, and it really does answer a ton of questions and help you start those conversations. So thanks for having me today, Tara.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed the presentation and learns a lot, and download that guide for more information and some sample scenarios. We have some stories in there as well to give you an idea of how we can help.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.